Welcome to Making Leaders, a series of conversations with people who are leaders of this fast-changing industry, as well as those likely to step into leadership roles in the future. My name is Robert Bell, Executive Director of SSPI. The goal of our Making Leaders series is to move talent and career development topics higher on the management priority list for space and satellite companies, because this is a time when they are in relentless competition for talent with the best-known names in technology. Making Leaders is made possible by continuing financial support from SSPI sponsors NewTek and OneWeb Satellites. We're speaking today with Steve Collar, CEO of SES. The company flies the largest communications satellite fleet in this part of the galaxy, and the only one made with spacecraft in both GEO and MEO orbits. He became CEO in April 2017, a year after SES acquired full ownership of O3b, which he then led as CEO. That company, founded in 2007 by Greg Weiler, attracted multiple backers including SES, Google, Liberty Global, and Allen & Company. In 2015, it became the fastest-growing satellite operator in history. Before joining O3b, he worked in commercial business development and technical roles at SES WorldSkies, New Sky Satellites, Astrium, and Airbus. It's been a long, varied, and rewarding career that led him to the leadership of SES. We're going to spend the next few minutes learning about it. We caught up with Steve through a video connection at the SES headquarters office at the Chateau de Betzdorf in Luxembourg. Steve, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and to get us started, let's talk about the road that got you here. What were your childhood and early career years like?
So my childhood was pretty straightforward. Mum was a social worker, Dad worked for the Navy, two brothers, I was the middle one. My early career, my first job was working for what is now Airbus, manufacturing satellites. And I think putting, how I wound up from my childhood through to working in the space industry, I think the values of your childhood shape you fairly early. And so what I take from my childhood and my upbringing was, the values of my parents and kind of how I was raised and how I was brought up. And I think that's probably true for all of us, but I think it's really super important. For me, it was about, we weren't particularly well off, so I kind of saw what my parents had to do to provide for us, myself and my two brothers, and for them it was a lot about making sure that they made sacrifices in order that we could succeed and that we could go to university. That was always very important for them. So I think I took that idea of, sacrifice, of, working hard, of, doing things for others. And that definitely impacted me. I think otherwise it's about, you do take on the values of your parents, which in my case, again, had to do with, honesty, integrity, authenticity. They always encouraged us to be ourselves. And I think that's definitely something that, again, I've taken forward.
How do you think that background influences how you lead today?
Well, I think a lot of it, for me, the most important thing in leadership is authenticity. I think there are many, many different types of leaders. And I think if you try and be somebody else, it generally ends badly. So for me, many, many different styles and types of leadership can work. The most important for anyone is that it's yours, that it's your brand, your style, and that you should always learn and adapt over time, but it has to be authentic.
When you went to university, did you have any idea what you wanted to do for a career?
No, and I've never had that. So I studied engineering at college, and I was always interested in aerospace, actually more the aero than the space. I wasn't one of these who kind of had big ambitions to be involved in space. I started working for an aeronautical company. As part of my degree, I would go in the summer to work at an aerospace company, but specifically making parts for aircraft and designing them. And I was always fascinated by that. And then an opportunity came to move more into the space area. So I never had I must go do this. And frankly, never have at any stage in my career. And as I've done different stuff with, different roles within my career, it's always just felt like the right time to go do something different, whether that be in a different company or more often just a different role within the same company. It's always just felt like the right time to go do something else.
What was your first role managing people?
I mean, I would say the first proper leadership role was, so I was working for what was Matra Marconi Space, and we were building, actually I was involved in building a satellite for Intelsat. And so I was the payload project manager, and so I had a team of people that were working for me in terms of integrating and building and designing, integrating and building the payload. And that was my first, I would say, leadership role. I'd led people, individuals, what have you, projects before, but that was the first time where I had, you know, a bunch of people who were reporting to me, and where the sort of success of the project was very much, I would say, on me and on my leadership.
Did you find at the time that leading came naturally to you, or was there an adjustment that you had to make?
Oh no! I'm a very I often say I'm an extrovert, which means I have to say things out loud before I know how I feel about anything, and that's very much the case. So I like being surrounded by people. I like being in teams. Teams is where it's at for me, and at all stages in everything I've done, that's been very important. So I wouldn't necessarily say that leading people was something that I felt was a natural talent, but I certainly feel being part of shared success and shared experience is very important to me. So I feel much more comfortable in that kind of setting than as an individual contributor.
Is that what you'd say is the most important lesson you learned about leadership, or is there something else?
Look, I think the other thing, I mean, to me, again, leadership's about many things. Authenticity is probably the most important, but I've learned tremendous amounts through my career from great people that I've worked for. And I feel like that's probably the biggest single influence. We talked about influence that parents have and upbringing and so on. But in my first job, I had a great boss. I was working on a project. This guy was the project leader. He was an older guy. He certainly felt older at the time. I was in my early 20s. He was in his 60s. I'm a bit closer to that these days. But he brought such calmness, such wisdom, such insight, and I found it incredible that, you know, he always had the right answer and provided such real leadership. And I've been fortunate. I've worked for, 4 or 5 people in my career, and that doesn't sound like that many, but it in terms of people who I really feel have had a big influence on me, and where I've taken very significant parts of their leadership style and tried to incorporate it into my own. So, learning from the people that you've worked for and with is probably, for me, the thing that shaped my style more than anything else.
So is leading by example something that you take pride in and look for in those you consider for leadership roles in the company?
I think it's definitely part of it. I think you shouldn't be asking people to do anything that you're not ready to do yourself, and I think that resonates very strongly. I think being able and being prepared to take decisions. I think being ready to give the credit, to others for those things that have gone well, and frankly take the responsibility for things that have not gone well is important. But yeah, I think it's more a reflection than it is something that I would necessarily advocate. My reflection is the significance and the importance of working for good people and taking parts of their leadership style.
How do you recognize good talent when you see it?
It's one of the hardest things to do, recognizing talent. I actually am quite a believer in instinct. I think more often than not, it's fit. It's it's listening quite carefully to. It almost doesn't matter what questions you ask. In my experience, it's listening to the way answers are put together and how people respond in certain situations. But I also think there are many different types of leaders, and again, it's the danger is you just hire people that are a bit in your own mold or in your own likeness, and that's really dangerous. And so, almost a commitment to it's not diversity exactly, although that's very important, but to having different voices in the room, particularly on a leadership team, is important.
You say recognizing talent is hard. Let's make it a little harder. What would you ask if you only had 5 minutes to interview someone?
If I had 5 minutes to interview someone, I think I'd just want to have a conversation, and it would obviously be in 5 minutes, relatively rapid fire. But I want to understand really what makes that person tick. What's at to get as quickly as possible to people's values. Because I think that's the stuff that ultimately, under stress, under the challenges that we all face in business, those things are the most important. And to me, and particularly to work in my team, I need to feel pretty closely aligned with people. It doesn't come straight away, but you want to figure out fairly soon whether you think that's possible.
There seems to be a lot of intuition involved in this, so would you say that you know fairly quickly whether someone has the potential you're looking for?
I normally know quite quickly, and then what I tend to do, so I know quite quickly whether I should hire someone or not, and then I tend to want to keep going back and testing that. So it's not that in 5 minutes I'm done, but I would say relatively quickly I know.
How would you describe the process that you go through to find and hire someone? And by you, of course, I mean the organization. What's involved?
I think you have to look for talent in a multitude of different places. I think for some people, where you're looking for very, very specific skills, you have to go find, you have to go visit the right door to go find those skills. But again, I think some of my most surprising hires, or if I think about people who've had the biggest influence in the companies that I've worked in that we've hired, it hasn't always been the rock stars or the highly paid people or the people where we've had to go get particular skill sets that have had the most impact and the most influence. So, at the moment we're focused on hiring a lot of graduates and younger talent because there's a very different mindset between a 48-year-old and a 25-year-old. We've had very, very different experiences in a very, very short period of time, and I want to make sure that within SES we have a good mix there, and so there's a lot of focus on hiring new talent.
What kind of advice would you give to a young professional just starting out, or even a student who is just considering the industry? What would your advice be?
I think my advice for anyone starting out is find something that you're passionate about. Figure out fairly early on what your mission, if you like, your personal ambition, and I don't mean that from a career perspective. I mean, what are you passionate about? And try and match as much as you can the place you work and the career you have to that passion. And for me, it was actually, it's really about working with people, shared success. And so there are many different, it wasn't that I had to go in a particular industry, but it massively helps that I find space inspiring. I find what we do tremendously inspiring. So I kind of get the best of both worlds. I feel like I'm working in an industry that I'm really excited and interested in, and I get to work with a lot of really, brilliant and inspiring people in a very creative way. And for me, it doesn't get better than that. And I would say for anyone starting out, look for that. Look for a role, and look for a career, and look for an industry that you can be passionate about.
Would you be receptive if a student at a university reached out to you to ask advice or even ask about a potential job?
Yeah, I regularly react if people mail me. I generally respond, and so because as much as anything else, as good as it is for to be responsive to somebody who's kind of out in the market, you also learn stuff, right? You learn stuff through that. So yeah, absolutely.
You say your job is hard. What are some of the key lessons that you've learned from that job along the way?
I would say every job I've done has felt hard, right from the very first one. And interestingly, every job I've done, I haven't felt ready for. So every time I've taken a different step or moved into a different role or taken a different position, there's an element of self-doubt. And I think that's healthy, at least in my case it is. I think if you go into a job knowing that you're good for it, you can miss things. And so for me, having that, an element of, okay, this is a different step, I'm doing something different here is a good thing. And I certainly felt that when I became the CEO of SES, and feel humbled every day to be leading such a fantastic company. Did similarly in becoming the CEO. My first CEO role was with O3b, which was a very, very different company. It was a startup. But at each point through my career, I think it's important when you move into a new role to understand a little bit your weaknesses or where you need to focus more. The leadership aspects at SES, I would say, haven't been spectacularly different from those that I've faced before, but I clearly feel a lot of responsibility for how we're doing as an organization. The more people who ultimately you're responsible for, I feel that very closely, and so it's very important to me that we do well, but also that this is a kind of environment and a place that people are excited to work in.
Let's talk a little bit about how you want your employees to feel. Why should someone feel proud to be working for SES?
I think there's a lot to be proud of at SES. I really do. I think, right back to the very early days of being one of the inventors of DTH, of our history sort of walks through Europe at an interesting time. The Berlin Wall, the unification of Germany, a lot of the very big news stories were happening right at the time where we were in the very early days of DTH and forming an industry that really didn't exist. I think that's to have carried from that pretty humble startup beginning through to being the largest satellite operator, but also to have developed businesses like O3b, to have nurtured them and supported them and sort of seen almost the next wave of startup within SES as being, how do we transform satellites' role in data is really super interesting. And I feel like we're on the forefront of another one where we think about how do we now take satellite mainstream and really make satellite and terrestrial networks fully interoperable and part of a cloud scale future. So lots and lots to be proud of. But what I hope is sort of the takeaway for folks that work here at SES is to be excited about the contribution that we're making and excited about what we're doing for our customers, and that we sort of see our business through the lens of our customers.
Do we still need pioneers?
Oh, I think every industry, every company needs pioneers. I think the difficulty is how do you when you come, so SES grew from being a startup into something of an incumbent. And so keeping that startup mentality, keeping that kind of pioneering spirit, keeping focused on what comes next. There's the, oft quoted, if you don't disrupt yourself, someone else will disrupt you. And I really believe that to be true. The satellite industry is unique. You have fairly large barriers to entry, but we've seen with the changes that we've witnessed within the satellite industry over the last 2 or 3 years, disruption comes, and it comes to every industry, and it needs to, and it's the only way that we move ourselves forward. So 100% we need pioneers or to be pioneering.
So you're definitely not afraid of disruptions?
No, I think you have to look. It's life. Change is a inevitable part of our current and our future. I think embracing that change and figuring out how you play a part in it and you play a part in disruption is one of the most exciting things. I mean, life would be boring if we came to work every year for 10 years and it was just flat the same. And I think the satellite industry has been guilty of that a little bit in the past. I think there hasn't been too much in terms of innovation and real change, and that's gone out the window over the last few years, and partly because of changes in consumer behavior, the massive demand for data, changes in viewing habits as it relates to video, partly because of big technological changes that we've been able to embrace and take advantage of. But none of that happens without some creativity around business cases and so on, and that's what we did, what SES did with O3b.
When you have talent in front of you that you really want to hire, what's the special quality of SES that you want to tell them about?
I think, look, at the end of the day, the USP, we shouldn't forget how fantastically exciting our industry is. It's genuinely what we do it's incredible, it's extraordinary, not just SES, but I would say more broadly in the space industry. But ultimately, what I hope brings people here and makes them stay is working with brilliant people and impacting, the lives of people downstream, whether that be because we're, delivering video to 350 million households and interacting with people on a daily basis, or because we're connecting people in parts of the world that wouldn't otherwise get access to the world's education, information, marketplace. We have a big impact, and I hope and think that that's what inspires people to come want to work here.
So we've got time for one more question, so let's make it a fun one. What is the best part of your job?
Oh, there are many. Many great moments from my perspective. I think the thing that gives me the most pleasure, the single thing that gives me the most pleasure is when I sit in front of customers and they tell us the impact that we're having on their business. When a customer, we had a kind of a big sales kickoff, and a customer stood in front of us and explained not only the impact of what we were doing and the connectivity we were providing, but what that enabled him to do, what that enabled his business to do. And this was in South Sudan, in the world's youngest country. And it was genuinely, it was inspirational for the entire room. And I love that. Similarly, I hate it, if I sit in front of a customer says, look, this is where you're falling short. So definitely high moments when I feel like we're really making a difference for our customers. Many, many good moments.
I want to thank Steve Collar for taking the time to share the experience and the insights he's gained from a career in leadership. And thank you for joining us. Like any tech industry, the space and satellite business is driven by the ambition, the knowledge, and the leadership skills of its people. In our Making Leaders series, we take time away from business plans and technology roadmaps to focus on the people making a difference. We thank SSPI sponsors NewTek and OneWeb Satellites for making this program possible. You can follow us on Twitter at SSPI, on Facebook or LinkedIn, just search for Space and Satellite Professionals. If you're not a member, I encourage you to become one by going to sspi.org/join. For Making Leaders, this is Robert Bell.